Hello and welcome to episode 376 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. And today we have a very, very, very special guest. This is a young man who I think a lot of us owe a big debt of gratitude to, played a big role in keeping DFS legal when it was on the ropes. He's out there, or at least he was out there, maybe still is out there, traveling the globe, stating our case against the enemies of fantasy sports. He's a fantasy player himself, finished fourth in the Scott Fish Bowl last year. Actually, a crazy accomplishment to finish fourth in that. It is Peter Schoenke of RotoWire, president of RotoWire, former chairman, current government affairs for the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. Peter, thanks for doing the show. How's it going?
It's going great. I guess if this was a radio show, I'd say first time, long time. So a big fan of the show and big fan of your work. All the way back to the days when we were going toe to toe with the Roto World, the RotoWire, back and forth battles of player notes. So anyone that had to, go through the pain of trying to figure out the Tony Dungy and Bill Belichick entry reports and post player notes on it has my respect. So for sure.
You know what? My head was like so far in the sand and I was just like so low on the totem pole. I didn't even realize there was a rivalry between Roto World and RotoWire at the time. That was like something that the big shots were handling, I guess.
A lot of respect for, Matthew Pulio and Rosenthal and Steven Alexander and obviously both Silvas. The best thing I could say about that era was you guys were all the biggest pain in my ass ever trying to catch up to you guys and didn't keep up. So, obviously you did a great job because we'd always be like, where do they get that? And I'm sure vice versa. So it was a fun era. It still happens now, but back then it was, just a small crew on each side. It was probably like 3 or 5 of us in the early days. We're talking like late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's crazy now. Everybody just assumes that player notes are there like automatic. And I even think like when at the end of my time at Roto World, people literally assumed it was like bots or machines. They didn't realize like people are out there on Christmas Day, on New Year's Eve, like looking for information to write the notes on. And so, yeah, crazy time for sure. On today's show, we're going to talk to Peter about everything going on with fantasy, DFS, betting, the landscape here in the United States. Before we get into it, I want to remind everyone that our 2022 draft kit at Established Run is officially live. If you are playing best ball, dynasty, home league, betting season-long props, Draft Kit Pro is for you. It's $49.99, includes Silva's top 150, rankings for every format, tons of strategy content, a lot more. Check it out on the subscribe page. All right, Peter, I wanted to start with your background. I didn't really know too much about you. I always just assumed from what I saw on Twitter and reading articles and stuff that you were a lawyer representing the fantasy sites, but I actually think that's not the case now. So how did you get into this intersection of politics, law, fantasy?
So not a lawyer. I have no law degree, no law training whatsoever. I started this business, RotoWire, in 1997. So I've been doing this forever. So I've been part of the FSGA, which used to be the Fantasy Sports and Trade Association, since its inception. In about 2005, 2006, they hired this lobbyist. Basically, the chairman at the time met him and said, we need to have a lobbyist. And he came along, he'd get on the phone once a month and talk about some things that were going on. It wasn't really doing anything. And I said, you know what, I'm going to manage this guy. I'm going to take this over. I'm going to do this. Really with the idea of almost like firing him because it wasn't doing anything for us. And next thing you know, there's a person in Maryland that contacted their legislators saying that they couldn't get paid out on a prize because of Maryland law for fantasy sports. And it was like, I think it was like a piece of memorabilia or a couple $100 or something. And I was like, oh, wow, we can actually do something here. And we passed a law in Maryland and that was it. And then I just took off and I just sort of, got into it and have been doing it ever since. But yeah, I don't have any, I'm interested in politics and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, not a lot of formal training, which, when things got really hot and heavy, 6-7 years later, was kind of crazy that I'm the most prominent and only guy, and I didn't have any formal training in this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And like, I assume, I started working in the fantasy industry around 2006, 2007. It was mostly quiet, I would say, until, at least quiet on the legal front until, 2020, 2012, 2013, 2014. Like fantasy was kind of, I don't want to say sleepy, but it wasn't like in your face. Obviously, everything changed with DFS. When did you first hear about DFS, and what do you remember about those early years? Obviously, we'll talk about 2015, but what do you remember about the early years when DFS first came on the scene?
We didn't have a lot of like major legal battles for the industry from like 95 to like 2005. There just wasn't that much money. I mean, before the
Yeah.
World Championship of Fantasy Football, you couldn't win more than like, I don't know, $10,000 maybe in the biggest fantasy contest in the country. So it really didn't get a lot of scrutiny until 2010, 11, 12, 13, when suddenly, FanDuel and DraftKings were raising tens and then hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were advertising, we're giving away, millions of dollars and then billions of dollars. And then that's when everything just got crazy. Before that, there were definitely some legal stuff. The biggest worries before that were somebody get fired at their job, right? They would play fantasy football, and then their employer would use it as a pretext to fire them, saying, "Oh, voila! There's this email that says that you had a $50 entry fee into your season-long fantasy football league. Therefore, we're firing you." And so we always wanted to try to prevent that. That's kind of how I got involved, and that was kind of the goal in the early days. And then the money got big enough where suddenly you got Donald Trump talking about it, or not, Republicans talking about it in a debate, and testified before Congress, and it just went off the rails.
Yeah. When you hear about someone getting fired, like literally, like what do you do? Do you actually like call a lawmaker or call a lobbyist in their state and be like, hey, this is messed up. Let's get this changed?
Yeah, I think back then it was more just we wanted to establish that fantasy sports was not illegal gambling. That anything like that just shouldn't really happen. It was more cultural than legal. I mean, I think you could probably get fired for any reason. But then eventually the prizes, we wanted to go to each state and clarify that it was legal. See, the thing about fantasy sports is that what determines something as gambling in the country is left up to the states. And generally speaking, most states, like 40, 45 of them, have a standard that if something has more skill than luck, it's not considered gambling. So fantasy sports, there's more skill than luck. It should be readily apparent. And so that's what it always had kind of operated under. Then there was a federal law in 2006 called UEJA, which made it illegal for websites to transfer funds to illegal offshore, gambling sites. That's what wiped out poker, Black Monday and all that kind of stuff, Black Friday or whatever it was called. But then they had an exception for fantasy that said, as long as there's a criteria, multiple players, multiple games, then it's not considered, gambling for bank transfers. That was a real win for us at the time. Sort of just, had the federal government's blessing that fantasy sports was not gambling. And that was kind of the main thing, but then each state, it's not 100% clarified. It's not in the law. So somebody could question it, and, then everything's up in the air. Payment processors, that's the big thing. They might get uncomfortable. Suddenly it's hard to have a business. You can't really have an online business without payment processing. And that's when the whole thing kind of got crazy.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So that was kind of the crux of it. So each of these states is, a little unclear. And we went into some states to try to, confirm that it was legal. And, it was a battle where we've had 26 states now that have passed laws to confirm that fantasy sports are legal. But yeah, so it's a convoluted system that we keep fighting to try to make it so that fantasy sports are you're able to play every day. And we've been successful in most states, but there's definitely some states that are still a problem.
Yeah, I want to get into all that for sure. One thing I want to ask about is during that time, like that 2012, 13, 14, I feel like there was some animosity between the season-long bros and the DFS bros. Like I feel like we see this in every industry where like someone comes in to disrupt. Airbnb disrupted hotels, and the hotels hate the Airbnb, and Uber disrupts cabs, and all the cab companies and cab drivers hate Uber. And in fantasy sports, it was DFS sites, DraftKings, FanDuel. There were a ton more back then that were disrupting the whole season-long game. I always saw it as like, oh my God, this is actually going to inject like real money into the industry. And so I was always for it as someone who was like season-long, but into DFS also. Did you feel the animosity between the season-long guys and the DFS guys?
Oh yeah, that was definitely a problem for sure. The DFS guys had all raised a ton of money. They were younger, the older season-long guys weren't making as much money. The DFS guys, just were more dismissive of season-long, and, we have the real game. And at one point in the lobbying thing, the DFS companies were saying that, it takes more skill to play DFS than it does season-long. And my role was to try to keep everybody together. Because I knew that we had these legal battles probably coming up, and if we were divided, we would fail. And Greg Ambrosius, you may know, who kind of runs. He was a former FSTA chairman and runs the NFBC and NFFC. He used to be in the trading card business. He ran one of the biggest baseball, football trading card magazines back in like the 90s, and he would always tell us like that industry died because all the people in the industry, all the companies, all the people, they didn't stick together. They fought each other. They mass produced. They like ruined the industry because, they just couldn't agree, and they couldn't fight off regulatory challenges and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, we got to stick together. We got to stick together. Mm-hmm. And that, I give that guy a lot of credit, because that became my mantra, and Paul Charchi and other people who led the industry really tried to keep us all together. And that really paid off when the DFS crisis came. It held together just enough. But yeah, there was a lot of animosity. And I think that's dissipated now over the years, because I think the people who season long have seen that DFS is a great thing for season long, and they all mix together. And the people who are playing season long to play DFS. I mean, it's not like there was this worry at a time that everyone was going to quit playing season long. They were just going to play DFS, and that was it. I don't think that's been the case at all. I mean, I don't play season long any less. I mean, now I just play more of everything. So
right. I'm curious. This sounds like a lot of work. I mean, even before 2015, this sounds like a lot of work. Like, were you doing this out of interest for RotoWire, out of interest for the industry, or like, I assume it's not a really lucrative position to be like, working for the FSTA or whatever it was at the time.
It's all free. It's all free volunteer. I mean, it's all the above. I mean, obviously, RotoWire's done really well. The industry's done really well. So I had a lot of reason to do it, both personally and professionally. It's also a good group of people, all together. But there was a time when the DFS crisis happened, the fall of 2015. I went to my partners and basically said, I'm making the FSTA my full-time job. I'm going to go on the road, and I traveled down the road, probably every week for about 6-7 months, lobbying. And I just told them, I'm not going to do much day to day for RotoWire for a while. I'm just going to do this. I'm the only guy here. And at the time I was, so it worked out, but it worked out really well in the end. I mean, RotoWire is doing great, and we would not be doing as great if DFS didn't exist. So It worked out really well. But yeah, I put in a lot of time, but it paid off for me personally. But yeah, I wasn't getting directly paid.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I know. I'm interrupting the video. Wah. But if you're enjoying this video and want to see more fantasy football and DFS content like it, please just take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. Really does go a long way for us, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching. And now back to the show. All right. So take me to 2015. I was actually working with DraftKings at the time. I was not an employee, so I wasn't privy to like everything that was going on, but I was an independent contractor. I was part of the DK Pro program. And, for those guys don't remember, FanDuel had a really big lead. And DraftKings was chasing hard. And that led to like this outrageous advertising blitz on television. That started to piss people off. We had Ethangate, which set people completely off. We had DFS brought up as a topic at the presidential primary, which Peter already mentioned. I mean, things got really, really out of hand during that time in 2015. Where were you at? And were you like, oh my God, this is big trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw it coming. I mean, in late 2014, early 2015, it's such a big industry now. I mean, fantasy sports is probably like a $10 billion industry with, when you figure out all the money that goes into it. But at that time, neither FanDuel nor DraftKings had any lobbyists. They didn't even have full-time lawyers. Yeah. There was no industry. I was the only industry lobbyist per se in the entire industry. And so, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know what I'm doing. So late 2014, early 2015, you can kind of see this dribble of all these like news stories, like this is gambling. And every single time that they'd raise more money and draw more attention. Mm-hmm. And you had all the, established casinos and tribal gaming and everything like that with their, knives out to try to kill this before it got big. And so I knew there's something bad was going to happen. So I'm trying to like get them to hire lobbyists and do things. And so I kind of knew, but I didn't know it was going to explode the way it did. I mean, it's just way bigger than I ever could imagine, but I could see it happening. But thank goodness the industry hired a gentleman named Jeremy Kudon and a company called Oric. And that was in the spring. And so we'd kind of gotten a little bit ready. And he actually knew what he was doing. Like, had run these campaigns, knew the states, had the lawyers. He was really, really smart. And luckily, the FSGA, FanDuel and DraftKings collectively agreed to hire that firm. and him, and he was just by the time, in the nick of time before everything exploded, we sort of had a little bit of our act together. But yeah, that thing was crazy. It was just crazy. It was, remember, like, it's hard to imagine now that, remember, ESPN on the bottom of their, like, they have the scroll. It's like MLB, NFL. They'd have DFS, and they had updates every day for like 2 weeks. And I just kept thinking, man, if I like said something stupid, I'm going to be on the bottom of ESPN the whole time. I mean, that is just nuts. Like right now, I could say just about anything dumb on your podcast. They'll never make ESPN. But back then, man, it was so crazy. And so there's so much attention that, that literally could have happened.
Yeah. I mean, Pete and Al, I was doing the podcast with Pete and Al, and they were flying to Connecticut. I mean, all the way across the country, they were flying every week to be on SportsCenter. I mean, to talk about DFS stuff. I mean, it's so crazy. You mentioned lobbying. I have an extremely cynical and pessimistic view of lobbying, but that's probably not fair because I've never actually like been boots on the ground. I just assume lobbying is like code for bribing politicians. In other words, like, we're going to contribute a bunch of money. We're going to come to your house. We're going to, I don't know, we're going to do whatever we got to do to make you vote the way that we want to vote. I could not believe in 2015 when I found out that DraftKings and FanDuel did not have any lobbyists on staff. I think I actually remember tweeting at the time in like fall of 2015. I think I tweeted something like, DraftKings and FanDuel should take every penny they've spent, their plan to spend on advertising, and spend on lobbying, aka bribing politicians. And I don't know, is that too cynical of a view of lobbying, or how did that go?
It's not that cynical. I mean, I think the lobbyist per se is not the problem, right? I mean, everybody's a lobbyist. I mean, if you're on an issue like, gun control, abortion, you name it, right? Like, their lobbyist is bad, but our lobbyist is good, right?
Right.
It's really just more the product of how politics is run with the money, where basically politicians are basically full-time fundraisers who happen to show up to vote every once in a while. But their job is basically just to like completely raise money all the time. And so that gives, companies and associations and all that kind of stuff, too much sway over the common person. And, that's the game you got to play. And we were a part of it, but we were completely outgunned. So we were able to rally just because we had a lot of grassroots. We had a lot of people who, were calling in. And so that kind of helped offset that money, that stuff. But yeah, definitely got to see it inside. I mean, for the for the daily fantasy sports bills, I mean, you name the politicians, just a vast mix of far right, far left. Mike Pence, signed the Indiana bill. Cuomo, New York. I mean, so it was you got into the inners of politics and got to see it in full activity.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if people really realize. I thought like DFS was like actually on the ropes, and I remember like there was a hearing in New York in 2015, or I guess they were trying to pass a law in 2015 before some deadline that they had, and I actually remember like sweating it because like I was like so worried. I was watching like a live stream, like a C-SPAN live stream of like New York House of Representatives in Albany or something like that. And I was trying to get updates on what was going on. I don't know if you were there. I know Robbins and Nigel were up there. Is that as dire as it seemed? And how close do you think DFS was to getting killed off legally back then in 2015?
I mean, it definitely has had a lot of moments where it was, flatline pretty much. And that was one of them because that was the vote in the midsummer of 2016 to pass the legislation in the New York legislature. And really, I mean, until like the 11th hour, we didn't know if it was going to pass. And one of the DraftKings lobbyists who got hired after that, one of the first guys, he had texted me like late that night, like, I'm leaving Albany. It's all over. That's it. We're done. And I was like, oh man, like 6 months of work. And, now like it's going to take a huge hit. And then somehow it passed. So, but really it was just because so many people called in and emailed their politicians that I think they just really felt the heat. And at the end of the day, they got something done. And that made a huge difference. But that was one of like several near death moments. We actually had a near death moment almost this year. That probably wasn't on anyone's radar. The New York, the highest court in New York, which is, the Supreme Court everywhere else, but called something different there, had a decision to say that bill can stand because the legislature has the power to pass that bill, which really in essence came down to the fact that fantasy sports is not gambling. It's a game of skill, and they could determine that. But if we lose that one, that bill's toast and we're back to scratch in New York. And so, yeah, I mean, every time you think you win, it's still like, something can pop up. So
yeah, man, God, it's even like kind of scary to think about, but it does strike me as, it gives me some faith in the political process that like if enough people write their legislator and call in, like forget about, partisan stuff, forget about lobbying. Like if enough people call in, like maybe they'll actually listen. And it seems like in this case, like they actually listen. Like I didn't think these guys even cared, how many people call in, 1 million calls, 2 million calls, doesn't matter. Like show me the money for my campaign contributions. But that's good to know that if enough people call in, it does make a difference.
Yeah, that's like one thing in this process I really learned is that you really can make a difference by contacting your legislators. I can't tell you how many times I was in a meeting with a state legislature trying to lobby for a bill, and they'd say, "Oh, we've had a lot of contact, a lot of input about this issue." I'd be like, "Oh, how many calls or emails do you get?" Thinking there'd be like 100 or something like that. They're like, "Oh, we got like 6 emails." I'm like, wait, what? But like to them, that was a big deal. I mean, especially on some of these smaller issues, maybe if they'd gotten 6 emails about, I don't know, taxes or the budget or, abortion or something like that, it would make a difference. But something small like this, it really makes a difference. And that's why I think for your listeners out there who are in some of these states where you can't play DFS, you don't have sports betting yet, like really reach out to your legislator. It makes a big difference. You'd be shocked. And that was one thing that was refreshing about this whole thing was that process. And that's like the one asset that we really had as an industry was that, we can bring in, hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of phone calls and stuff like that to politicians, and they suddenly feel the heat, and that actually makes a difference. So that's actually refreshing. Not all issues are like that, but ours definitely was.
Sure. And that actually brings me to my next question, which I want to get to present day now. It actually strikes me as really different. Like it feels like in DFS, like everyone hated us, right? Like the states hated us, the attorney generals hated us, the public, the media, we got dunked on by Stephen Colbert for like 20 minutes straight. I went to a freaking, I was in New York and I went to like a Save Fantasy Sports protest in front of the attorney general's office, which was utterly humiliating. But anyways, it seemed like they hated us. But with sports betting, it seems to be more positive. Like the states want it legalized, a lot of them, it seems, so they can wet their beaks, right? The public seems less turned off for whatever reason by sports betting versus DFS. Is that the right read? And what do you think about this whole idea of the sports betting process of legalization versus DFS?
Well, I mean, for DFS nowadays, like I said, we passed laws in 26 states. And for the most part, it's kind of over, right? I mean, people, like everyone's like, oh, this is something we can regulate, we can tax. It's not illegal gambling, so that everyone's on to the next thing. It's not anything that gets politicians on TV anymore, so no one cares. DFS is a little bit at risk in some states, like what we saw in Florida last year, where there's the entrenched companies, whether it's casinos or tribal gaming, whatever, in these states, that want to keep FanDuel and DraftKings really out of the state, and so they want to get rid of fantasy. And that almost happened in Florida before lots of consumers called their legislators and stopped it. So there's some battles for DFS, but for the most part, it's done. Sports betting, yeah, there's just more money, so it's like there's a lot more incentive for the legislators to pass it, to get tax revenue. There's more lobbying, to your point. There's more money involved, from these companies to pass it than there ever was, for DFS. I mean, sports betting and casino is just so much bigger. I mean, daily fantasy sports, the total entry fees that go into fantasy sports is about $4 billion a year in terms of the entire country. One land-based casino in a bigger state has $4 billion of total revenue coming in. So, I mean, it's just, 10 times, 100 times bigger in terms of all the revenue. So it's just a way bigger issue, and they're more likely to do it than fantasy ever was.
Yeah. I mean, the best argument is like the people want it, and you're going to get a huge tax. I mean, we can talk about some of the tax implications in some of these states, which I do want to get to in a second. But I mean, you can get huge tax benefits in some states, depending on how it's structured. One more DFS question. I get asked all the time, I'm in Hawaii, I'm in Idaho, I'm in Louisiana, I'm in Montana, I'm in Nevada, I'm in Washington. I can't play DFS. Why can't these people play DFS in those states?
Well, every state has its own politics and its own stakeholders, right? There might be a casino or tribal gaming or something like that. And so everyone's a little bit different. Probably the biggest one that's going on right now is Ontario. I know your show last week, you had for somebody. And so Ontario, specifically, is Canada. Canada, the laws on what determines gambling are a little bit different. And when they passed sports betting, they said DFS is also sports betting according to our laws. And therefore, we can't have shared liquidity with anywhere else, meaning like you could have a pool of just Ontario residents playing DFS, but they can't be in the same pool as like, New York or Iowa or Wisconsin or something like that. And that makes it extremely difficult to run a contest because you just, there's no one state fantasy or DFS, right? You get DraftKings or FanDuel or some startup isn't going to just have like the, Indiana only DFS contest. There's not enough liquidity. And even for Ontario, which is, 20 million people or whatever, there's not enough liquidity. So they couldn't do that. And then they have really high taxes and fees because they said, oh, it's the same as sports betting. That's what happens. A lot of these states are these legislators either by choice, because they're trying to kill off, daily fantasy or fantasy because they're worried about the competition, or because they don't really know what they're doing. They take the same rules, regulations, taxes, fees of sports betting and put it on fantasy sports. And that doesn't really work. I mean, fantasy sports is a lower margin business. Casinos have things like actual, money, people, actually touching the money. The volume of money that's going through is way bigger. So all of those regulations are just way more expensive. There's more investigations. There's more, auditing and things like that. And it's not like the fantasy sports industry is opposed to any of that. But when you start having to do all the extra audits and investigations and pay all these fees and stuff like that of sports betting, it just doesn't work. Suddenly DFS is really hard. And when you have season-long contests like the Fantasy Football Players Championship or the NFFC, that's prohibited. They can't pay that. So that's why they're not in a lot of states. And so we can go through some of the ones specifically, but that was the thing in Ontario. You mentioned like Washington. There they have tribal gaming. That's one of the states that actually has a different rule for what's gambling. They say any luck and it's gambling. Well, that's a different calculus for fantasy sports. And so it's not legal there. We've tried to pass a bill to make it legal there, and we've been opposed by all the tribal gaming there. So the outlook on that one is tough. I mean, it's kind of like, we're going to keep trying, but it's going to be a long slog. So yeah, that's a lot of words, but basically each one of these things is kind of its own world. And, and we're sort of like fighting the slog in each state over the years to try and get it better.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, what you're saying is that tribal gaming and land-based casinos don't want to compete with DFS sites, so they just try to block it in legislation.
Yeah,
period.
It's not really fantasy per se. It's more just like tribal gaming in some states, not all states, but many of them. Are just really scared of anything online, right? They make all their money from people going to these physical casinos and putting down bets, and they're just scared of online, that's going to take business away from the physical casinos. Now, that's actually not the case. In the states that have had online betting, New Jersey, Michigan, actually the casinos have done fine. They've even actually done better in some cases. So there's not really, it's not going to cannibalize it. So that's not really a worry. And they don't really care about fantasy, but they're just worried that FanDuel, DraftKings, whoever else is going to come in, have their fantasy app, start offering iGaming, and then no one's going to go to their casino anymore. This is an outlet to do it. So they try to block it at all costs, and so that's what's happened in a lot of those states.
Got it.
There's DraftKings is in 44 states. So, I mean, we've gotten fantasy in most states. We've had some big wins in the last year. Like we've had Louisiana, we had Iowa, we had Arizona. Hopefully we'll add Washington at some point in the near future. But yeah, Hawaii, Idaho, those are issues. And hopefully the markets aren't so big that everyone's running in there to try to like open it up. So hopefully someday we'll knock it off. Yeah.
Hawaii sounds like a good lobbying trip for you though. I would take that.
I actually testified this year in the Hawaii legislature, but they had virtual testimony. So like, I'm like, really? It's like 4 or 5 years ago, you couldn't send me here in like January and I fly out there on some trip where I could go testify in Hawaii. So this winter, I got to do it online. I'm like, I guess that's the downside of Zoom. You don't get that nice trip anymore.
We mentioned taxes earlier. So I think I know the answer to this question, but on betting. So I'm here in Colorado. We have, I don't even know, I'm a hardcore grinder. I don't even know how many books we have here in Colorado. It's insane. There's got to be at least 10, 15, 20. I don't even know. But in other states, there's like 2. So I think I know the answer, but can you explain why some states have so many books and others have 1 or 2?
So the way that this should work, like you're talking about government and whether, lobbying and if it's, the good and the bad, this to me, like a lot of this process is sort of the worst of government, where the government picks winners and losers. I mean, the way it should work, in my opinion, is if, we were in the legislature and we decided to have sports betting, like, there's arguments for and against it. We would have an open marketplace and just have tons of licenses, and you pay a bunch of money and that'd be it. But that's not how it works in a lot of states. So a lot of states, they give the existing stakeholders, the existing casinos, tribal gaming, the rights to do it. And so then you have a limited number of licenses. And in some cases, it's only like one, Oregon, there's only one license. It happens to be through DraftKings, through the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
In Connecticut, there's only, two, and then in some states, in Colorado, they have something called skins, where they'll give a license to some existing casino, and they'll be able to like do deals with like 3 or 4 of them. So Colorado is one of the ones that has like a ton of market access, they call, so that a lot of sports books can get in there, and other states do not. But each state is different, and so yeah, you're going from state to state. You're driving through. You're firing up your phone. You want to bet, do sports betting online. Each one's different, and
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy that it's that way.
Well, that's actually not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say that in some states, the way they structured the bills with the taxes is so overwhelming, and the fees just to start a sports book in certain states is so outrageously high that only, DraftKings or FanDuel or some company with a ton of money can do it. If you're a startup sports book, you may not even want to be in X state because they're charging you $1 zillion in taxes. They're charging you $1 zillion to get a license. And like, I don't have that much money. I need to concentrate on states where I think I can win. So I thought that's what you were going to say. Like the tax structure prevents some companies from competing in certain states.
Well, there's 2 things about that. One is like, it's a lot higher, you need a lot more money to start up a sports book, right? So if you and I wanted to start up a DFS company, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we can kind of work our way up. If we want to start up a sports book, I mean, millions of dollars, lawyers and regulations and, software and all kinds of stuff. So that's already a barrier to entry. But as far as the taxation goes, as far as these companies, as far as like some smaller company going in so far, that hasn't been prohibitive so far, just because I think that all these companies are trying to win market share, and they'll take a loss or whatever, so the New York tax rate is like really high.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe in the long run, that's not sustainable. Maybe you'll see some sports books pull out and say, well, we just can't make money here. But in the short term, they're all just so desperate for, to try to like win over customers and get market share, that I think they're willing to, take some hits here and there. So yeah, that hasn't been as much a problem. It was more of a problem for DFS. You'll see that in some states. So for example, in Indiana and Delaware, they passed fantasy sports laws, and they have a $50,000 flat fee for any company to get into the state. Well, for FanDuel and DraftKings, they're big enough. It's not that big a deal, even though they might not be making $50,000 a year in Delaware. I mean, hardly anyone lives there, right? But for FFPC, NFBC, your season-long contest, they don't make that much money. They're not making billions of dollars, so they're not in Delaware. And so that's how they get crowded out. So that's more of an issue for the smaller fantasy sports market, less so for the sports betting market. But yeah, I mean, there might be some innovative startups, and especially the exchanges. I mean, hopefully one day we'll get some exchanges in some of these states where the taxes and the fees could be a problem. But for right now, that hasn't really been the biggest reason that they aren't in there. The biggest reason they're not in there is because of this market access problems, right? Like, you're going to have a state that opens up, and you're only going to have like 5 or 6 licenses, and it's really hard for like you and I to have our Joe startup sports book, and we're going to be one of the top. It's only five licenses, in some state. Well, I mean, we're not going to compete. We're not going to have the money to outbid, one of those big guys. So hopefully that'll change, but we'll see. I mean, luckily Tennessee and Colorado are 2 markets where there's a lot of market access, and you can see some smaller companies try to compete. But most states are not like that.
Yeah. Shout out to my guy, Alec Garnett. He's a representative here in Colorado. I actually had him on the podcast a long time ago. He's been doing a ton of good work for the state of Colorado. Why can't, I'm here in Colorado, obviously I can bet draft props, NFL draft props. I can bet, some of these weird Super Bowl props. In other states, like, I don't think in Pennsylvania, New York, you can bet NFL draft props at all. I think you know what I'm referring to. Why can't people in Pennsylvania, New York, and I'm sure there's other states, why can't they bet draft props?
So each state's different. I mean, there's not like one universal sports betting bill. So a lot of sometimes they don't like props in the states, and so they just outlaw them, and that's it. I mean, you see that with college a lot. So a lot of the states like Iowa, Illinois, you can't bet college player props because they think that since they're local, somebody, is going to tip off somebody from the school and bet that. But of course, that's not really a deterrent, because you can just go to some offshore sports book or some local bookie, or you could just drive across the state into the other state and make the exact same bet. It's like, minutes away. So yeah, each state's just different, and that's why. So yeah, definitely you want to check to see where you can do that. But every state has their own characteristics, which makes life really difficult for all these sports books. I mean, think about trying to manage that on the back end. Like, this state you can do that, this state you can't. I mean, it gets to be a complex problem that costs a lot of money to administer.
Yeah, I mean, my argument for that was always that, like, by having it legal and regulated, you can catch people doing bad stuff way easier. Like, if you're betting with a bookie, you're betting offshore, it may never show up on the screen. But if you try to bet $1 million on some, college player prop, or there's some really unusual betting pattern on a college basketball player prop, like, you're gonna be able to see that right away, and you can alert people, So, like, I think it's counterintuitive to what people think, but to me, like, legal regulated betting is more likely to catch bad actors than if it's not. You follow what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely the case. I mean, also, even if it's like legal, physical casino, you go with a whole bunch of cash and you drop a whole bunch of cash. Well, you can't really trace that as well as, online in many ways too. So yeah, there's a lot of, the arguments for legal online sports betting are that, consumer protection, just making sure you get paid out. I mean, like, if you win, a huge bet offshore, are you really going to get paid? You don't have anywhere to go if there's like a problem. And then also, forces them to, take into account consumer protection measures and problem gambling. So that if somebody's, really has a problem and they can spot that, it's on them. It's on the sportsbook operator to do the right thing. And, the offshore, there's nothing for that. So, and then obviously it collects the tax revenue. So if you think that, this is a vice and bad for society, well, in theory, the government should be able to collect taxes and spend money to help problem gamblers and reduce all the negative effects that's associated with gambling. So those are all the reasons to do it. It's just all that's what we're fighting to try to legalize it in all these states, because it's already going on. That's the main thing in all these states. People are like, oh, online sports betting, it's terrible. And all the negative arguments are kind of moot when it's like, well, I mean, you and I could call up an offshore sports book and in no time at all deposit and are off and running. So like, it's already happening. So you might as well, get everyone in the legal market and put all of those, good things into place versus doing it in the illegal market offshore or with bookies.
Yeah. I thought that too. And I don't really have any data to back this up, but like anecdotally, I feel like, and I thought the same thing too when sports betting got legalized, like everybody's already betting. It's not going to change anything. But I actually think anecdotally, it seems like more people are betting on sports now that it's legal. And maybe that's like a marketing thing, or maybe people didn't want to, go through the hassle of getting money onto Chris or Pinnacle or Bovada or whatever, or finding a local bookie. But I don't know. Anecdotally, it feels like more people are betting now. So I don't know.
And that could be the case. I think if you look at like England and the other markets, when it first got legalized, there's a big boost, and there's obviously a boost in problem gambling too, unfortunately. But then it kind of like after a while levels off,
Right.
And I think that's what could happen here as well. I mean, it's brand new, but how many people are going to be in it for the for the long run and do it all the time? So, Europe's been doing this for a while, and if you look at the history of those markets over there, it's an activity that is didn't go off the rails, right? It's like all of the worst things you're going to say about sports betting here, that hasn't been the case over there. It's something that's been, regulated, and they've worked on it, and it's been fine, just part of society. And that's what can happen here if they regulate it the right way.
Okay. There's some states before we get to the end here that I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this that are in. They want to know when they can bet on sports. I assume California and Texas are two of the biggest states we have here in the United States. Any update on California and Texas for sports betting, and what actually goes into trying to get something passed in a states as massive as California and Texas?
Well, California is going to have one of the biggest political battles of the year this fall. There's 2 ballot initiatives that people can vote on this fall. And so in California, if you don't know, there can be an initiative on the ballot. So, usually you have a law that the legislators pass. And that's the only way you can pass a law. But in California, you can put a referendum on the ballot, so you can vote for something. And there's 2 of them this fall. One of them is for most of the Indian tribal gaming who want to legalize gambling in their casinos, but only, not online, just physical, just retail. And then there's another referendum that's sponsored by FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, and a consortium of sports books that would devote money to homelessness and legalize online sports betting. And it's going to be just a massive political battle. It's probably going to be the most expensive ballot initiative in the history of the U.S. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to be spent. There's already ads running. I mean, people who are listening to this in California are probably already seeing ads running for these ballot measures. And if they pass, there could be online, sports betting in California, in the next 2 years or something like that. I'm a little bit skeptical on that because I just think that even if they pass, there's going to be just a ton of legal battles. And that's what happened in Florida. Florida passed a law. Now it's in total limbo because there's been a whole bunch of lawsuits about it. Mm-hmm. And, there's so much money, and many of the tribes have said that, they're just going to go all out to do anything to prevent online sports betting in California. So we'll see what happens. But, right now, I mean, certainly if you're a resident in California and you want to have legal sports betting, I mean, voting on the online sports betting bills is the thing you want to do. And you certainly will be inundated by commercials and advertising and op-eds and everything else this fall.
Yeah. What about Texas?
Texas, Texas has a big anti-gambling part of the state in terms of for religious and moral reasons. And the Republican Party's in charge there, and they have a lot of influence in the Republican Party, and so it hasn't really gotten much traction. But in the last year or 2 years, we've seen a lot of the bigger media companies and the leagues in particular get on board with trying to pass sports betting. So this last year, there was an unsuccessful effort. You saw the Mavericks and Jerry Jones and all of the leagues got behind it to try to pass it. So there's a lot of momentum. The biggest problem in Texas is just that their legislature only meets every other year. You know what I mean? Which, I mean, if you're somebody that doesn't like big government and you don't want much to get passed, well, that's a good thing, I guess. But if you do want something to get passed, it makes it really difficult. I mean, every you have to sort of like get everyone educated, build up momentum, and try to pass these bills. And lots of times, you fail one year, but you move the ball like a little bit downfield, and you finally get to the end zone, and then you finally score a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And so with Texas, it's like they only meet every 2 years, so it won't be until 2023 that we have another opportunity to do it. And and their legislature only is open for a couple months, so you have this incredibly narrow window. So I mean, I'm positive. I think it'll happen. I think if they met every year for longer periods of time, it would probably happen. But so we'll see. And like in Florida, Florida's another mess. Like I talked about, they passed a bill that gave all of the sports betting to one tribe, tribal gaming, and there was actually launched a casino, the Hard Rock Casino, which the Seminoles own, and it was actually up and running and live for a while. And then there was a lawsuit, and it got taken down, and now there's nothing. And I can get to way more detail on that. That would be really boring, but it's going to be a contracted, prolonged legal battle that will probably take well into next year after to determine it, and they might go back to the drawing board. So Florida isn't there, and that's the biggest thing if you're trying to figure out what they call the total addressable market for the United States, like how much sports betting there can be. I mean, those are the three biggest states, and none of them have them. Right. None of them have sports betting, and it's not really clear that it's going to happen anytime in the next year and a half. So that's kind of the bigger problem for the market and for the companies. And if you look out there, is that there's been a big wave of a lot of new states adding sports betting and online, and it's probably gone a little faster than I would have expected. But the three biggest states haven't all been able. There hasn't been a lot of progress.
So that leads me into how do you see the future? Obviously, the market is like. Well, I don't want to say the market is bearish on DraftKings, but because the market cap is still like $6 billion, which is like totally insane. But, DraftKings stock has gone from, $70 to $14. And obviously the overall market's gotten wrecked, and tech stocks have gotten wrecked. And you can go back and listen to my podcast with Strasser if anybody wants to talk more about DraftKings stock specifically. But like clearly, like they're not meeting the expectations that I guess the market had when they went public. And I think part of what people are realizing is hey, look, man, like being a sportsbook's good business, but you're still only holding, 2, 3, 4% or something like that. And you could say, yeah, they're not doing a great job. They're kicking too many people out. They're limiting too many people, whatever you want to say. The bottom line is like Strasser said, it's not that great of a business, but adding states and big states like the 3 Peter just mentioned, I think would make a big difference. So how do you see the future of this playing out for DraftKings, FanDuel, and any other competitors in the space?
Well, I think the crazy thing is if you look over the last 2 years, there's like the stock market story. Like if you just looked at the stock market prices of most of the stocks in the industry and DraftKings in particular that you talked about, you would think that there was like this crazy history of the company. Like, oh my God, they're going gangbusters. Oh, they're going to make zillions. Oh, now everything is terrible. And like they've made a bunch of bad decisions and the dynamics have totally changed. But really over the last 2 years, really nothing has changed. I mean, it's all been the same story. It's like sports betting in 2018 got legalized so that every state could do it, because before that had been essentially restricted to Nevada, and is a state by state rollout. And if you looked at everyone's, assessments of when they thought states were going to come live and how much the market was going to be, it's actually probably a little bit better than expected. I think that in terms of how much money and how soon all these states are going to come online. And I don't, so really fundamentally, nothing's really changed. Like if you were a believer in DraftKings or, the sports betting companies or the market and just anything in those areas, like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I mean, nothing's really changed. Meanwhile, the stock market went bonkers, in between all over the place for a variety of reasons. But, it's still a pretty promising outlook. There's going to be more sports betting markets. People, like you said, are into sports betting. Meanwhile, daily fantasy sports is still doing really well. It's growing. I mean, in states like New Jersey, where there's legalized sports betting and that they've had sports betting for the longest period of time, daily fantasy continues to do well. I think the thing that's really going to change the market at some point, I don't know what it's going to be in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe 5, maybe longer, but there's a thing called the Wire Act, which prevents interstate sharing of sports betting. So that's why you can't have you can't have a nationwide NCAA brackets pool, right? Because everything has to be individual states. So you can't get these massive pools, and you can't play all the games that you and I would play offline. Like we're going to do Super Bowl squares. We're going to do, NCAA brackets. We're going to do some, some tournament for the Masters, something like that. You can't really do that right now because you have to limit it to just one state. And so I think that if it's actually an opinion or it's an act in a federal act. If that would get changed, a bill would get passed that would allow them to do all that, then that's when you'd get that stuff. And I think that's like the next big thing. Because right now DFS is the only game you can really play where you put in, a little bit of money and you can win this massive prize. Right. And it doesn't really exist anywhere else. I mean, you can play the lottery, but your odds are so terrible. You're never, that's like crazy. And there's no skill involved. I mean, DFS is a skill game, but there's not even like a game, a gambling game of 100% of luck where you can do the same thing. So I think that's going to happen at some point. And I think that will have a big impact on the market with all kinds of new games and products and things that, we can only think about right now.
I agree. And everybody just wants to take a little bit of money and try to turn it into a lot, even if they know they're getting the worst of it. Like that's why single game parlays are so popular. That's why like long shots. I mean, the DFS lottos, that's why all that stuff is so popular. I'd agree with you that like that stuff is going to be huge. I did play in DraftKings. I think it was a super contest, or maybe it might have been both Survivor and super contest. I didn't think it was only in Colorado, but maybe I was wrong there. Didn't they have like a super contest or a Survivor last year? DraftKings did.
I think it was state by state, unless it was like a you entered for free.
Yeah. No, it definitely wasn't free.
There's the one in Vegas. There's the big Survivor contest, and there's like the super contest. And in Vegas, they allow proxies, right? So that you can call in and have somebody else technically enter it for you. So that's one way they get around that. But for the most part, you can't have there's not. I mean, could you imagine how big a March Madness contest would be if everybody was all one pool and you could enter across the country? That's seen as that is March Madness is seen as luck. It's defined as sports betting because you're picking teams, not individual players. And, we all know there's a lot of luck in that thing. But yeah, someday that hopefully will be possible, but that is not possible right now because of the Wire Act. And, that's the one thing that could really change the market, I think, in a big way. But other than that, I think that, sports betting is here. It's going to keep growing. At some point, California, Texas, Florida will add it, and we'll see states like Missouri and Minnesota that were unsuccessful this year in passing it. I think they'll pass it. Hopefully Massachusetts one of these days. That might happen this year. North Carolina might happen this year for online. Both those for online. And we just saw Kansas pass it. So, there's not that many states left, as we keep passing more and more, but there's still a lot of momentum for some of these states to add it. And some of them, like mine in Wisconsin, have added retail sports betting, brick and mortar, but not online. And hopefully someday they'll add online. But, like I said, the tribes here are very, very fearful of anything online.
Last question I have is a personal question. I love poker. I know you're not involved in poker at all, but it seems like kind of like a similar battle, but maybe with less people like you, less money behind it, fewer lobbyists, fewer companies that actually care. But when am I going to get to play poker like it was before Black Friday, where fire up Full Tilt or whatever, fire up Stars, and I can play against everybody all over the world?
Well, like I said, those a lot of those established physical casinos are afraid of anything online, so they're afraid of iGaming. And so iGaming's had a very slow rollout advancement. And we saw Michigan this last year at it, so they have poker and iGaming, all that kind of stuff. But other than that, there just hasn't been a lot of momentum. I mean, it just hasn't really moved very quickly. And that's actually where the real money is for these companies. Sports betting is small compared to, traditional, those kinds of games. I mean, if you look at Vegas, so for example, in April, just April, and just in Vegas, so this is just in the casinos, sports betting was 36.9 million in terms of their revenue. And roulette was 54, and craps was 41 million, and blackjack was 104. But penny slots was 341. That just blows my mind all the time that, penny slots and slots is that, that big. That's where all the money is. That's where the turf battle is. That's where they don't want to have iGaming. They want people to go into their physical casinos. And unfortunately, poker's just wrapped up into that. And so there just hasn't been a lot of momentum for poker. I think if you get sports betting that rolls out everywhere, and you get people more used to it, I think eventually the momentum is going to be there, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I know. It's a shame. People don't realize, man, slots is where it's at. If I could own one gaming device, I would just put a slot machine somewhere and start.
Well, the problem with that is that slots is also the market that's dying. I mean, that customer base is older and they're not playing anymore. I mean, younger people want to play skill-based games and games like poker. And I think that's where I'm always just kind of confused as the established brick and mortar companies. You think they'd be embracing all of these, younger, games that have younger crowds, but they're just holding on to their golden goose as long as possible and want to defend it as much as possible. And unfortunately, fantasy sports, to kind of go back where we started, got swept up into that, and we got caught in the cross hairs for that. And really, I didn't deserve it in my opinion. And, but somehow we're able to, for the most part, ward it off and hopefully keep fighting the fight and to finish these states that don't have it.
Imagine thinking that like grandma is going to stop playing slots because now DraftKings app is in your state. You know what I mean? Like it's such an insane thing to think.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to so many legislators who don't really get that concept though, but it's so true. Like you and I know that, like, it's just, they're not going to GPP bro it on a Saturday and max 150 lineups, right? Or they can just go, pull a couple slots and have a good time.
All right. Well, this is great, Peter. We can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done keeping this great game of DFS legal. Anything you want to tell the people, where they can find you, where they can find your work, anything else you want to tell the people?
Well, I mean, my day job is rotowire.com, which, you guys do great things at ETR. So hopefully it's a compliment. I mean, most people, buy more than one source. So check us out too. But I mean, on the sports betting and DFS front, my Twitter handle is Peter Schoenke, all one word. If there's a state or you're interested, let me know. I mean, I can't, like I said before, I can't tell you how much they pay attention. Just one person can make a big difference. So if you're in Iowa right now and you're trying to play season-long and you're mad that you can't play the NFFC, contact your legislator. It's going to make a big difference. And same with these other states. So reach out. Ontario this fall, we're going to try and get everyone in Ontario to contact their legislator, I guess, whatever they call them in Canada, their MPs, to try to change that law. Just like in New York, it really makes a big difference. So, if you're frustrated by that, reach out. There's some places to go to contact your legislator to do that kind of stuff. It does make a big difference. And, I know that you get frustrated people get frustrated. And I'm sure you get, stuff all the time that's like, I want to enter the FFPC and I'm in Iowa and I can't do it, or I'm in, Delaware or whatever. It's like, it's hard to explain to them why they can't do it. But the number one thing is reach out to your legislator. Believe it or not, it actually can make a difference.
The people who reach out to me, that they're just pissed they can't bet draft props. I can't tell you how many message I'm in New York where I see you talking about draft props. I can't find them. I'm like, I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
That market's going to be big though, because everything that people like you helped create in fantasy, people know player performance and individual stats. That doesn't exist in Europe. I mean, it's pretty rare. So that's going to be a booming market, and it's just a matter of how many states add sports betting, and then don't add all these quirky restrictions like you were talking about in New York, where you can actually do everything you want to do. So I think it's coming, and you guys are doing great work here, helping break down that market for everyone. So hopefully people are in a state and they can enjoy it, and more will come on soon.
All right. Appreciate all the time, Peter. This was great. Be sure to follow Peter on Twitter and reach out to him with normal questions. Don't be out of control. You can reach out to him with a normal question about what's going on in your state. For Peter, for Producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.